welcome to everybody who is attending to AI for Social Good webinar series being hosted by PoliSync. This is a series of 6 webinars, and all 6 of these webinars are going to help to introduce you guys to AI. We're going to be walking you through the fundamentals in this first one, but of course, we're going to be diving into other topics over the course of the webinar series. So before we get started, we just have some welcoming remarks from Cecilia. Cecilia is the managing director at PoliSync and of course, one of the original founders. Over to you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Sandra, and a warm welcome to the nearly 400 people who have taken the time to register for today's webinar. When we first began exploring the idea of an AI for social good webinar series for nonprofits, 2 key themes emerged across our network's discussions on generative AI. Number 1, there are widespread concerns, fears, and challenges arising about how to integrate AI into our nonprofit work responsibly. The second key area that we observed is that we are all a bit overwhelmed and uncertain about which Gen AI tools to use and integrate into our operations smoothly and effectively. This was confirmed in our March survey, which gathered responses from nonprofits across 42 countries. So thank you to everybody who responded to that survey, for those in particular who were online. So to support a learning journey that unpacks both of these areas, we've partnered with 6 outstanding nonprofit organizations working across policy, operations, research, technical expertise, and norm setting. These organizations are Co-Initiatives of Change, CALP Network, Globe Ethics, the Institute for Global Negotiations, the Lotus Flower, and IOM Research. These organizations cover a broad range of policy issues, including humanitarian action, migration, health, governance, and ethics, labor, refugees, gender, peace building, mediation, sustainable development, climate change, and more. Thank you to all of our collaborating partners for your support in shaping the series, recommending speakers, and promoting it through your networks. Thank you also to our speakers, and we have some fantastic ones online today, for your enthusiastic willingness to engage in these discussions. And thank you also to Microsoft Philanthropies for making this webinar series possible and for giving us the freedom to really design the series entirely based on the needs we saw among nonprofits. Finally, a big thank you to the PoliSync team for your energy and hard work and for making this happen in a relatively short time frame. Annabelle Milosavljevic, Sandra Uwantege Hart, Naledi Holbrugger, Valentina Lazzarini, Rebecca Bailey, and Hannah Kalichava. With that, I'll hand back over to the series moderator, Sandra Uwantege Hart, who is our Tech for Good strategist at PoliSync. Thank you, Sandra. Back over to you.
Thanks, Cecilia. So as I mentioned to everybody, just to give you a bird's eye view of the series of 6 webinars, today we're really just going to level the playing field so that we have the same information. So we're starting with the basics, but we're going to dive deeper and deeper into different topics that we worked hard with our partners on this webinar series to define. What topics are important to know, actually, if you're working in the nonprofit space? So we've got everything from digital threats, misinformation, ethics, governance, in addition to how do you use AI in specific areas of work. So namely humanitarian action, international negotiation. And then at the end, so this is June 17th, we're going to be diving into the question that is burning in everybody's minds sort of at the back about AI, which is how do we use it to enhance our capacities rather than replace us? So today's topic is just to kickstart the journey. We've got a great speaker with us today. We've got Mustać, who's going to give you guys an AI primer. She is the governance and privacy specialist at Spirit Legal, and she's also head of operations for the Institute for Global Negotiation, which is one of our webinar partners. We have Brent Phillips, who is producer of the Humanitarian AI podcast. Thanks, Brent, for being here. And who has also been in the AI for social good space since like a while. So he's one of the AI OGs. And we've got Ed Baldry, who runs Make Sense of It. So he's the director of design and development there and comes from a really long background of design, innovation, but also like technical skills, practical application, and notably the creation of custom-built AI applications. So all of these guys work with organizations when they're just getting started on AI. So to begin with, Taya, you've won multiple awards. You're used to explaining this to organizations. We're really happy to have you. And you have a unique perspective, right? You're coming from the legal space, and so for the audience that's here, Taya also knows a lot about regulation and compliance. And she's going to walk us through her AI primer. So over to you, Taya, for the AI primer. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. Thank you so much for having me. Let me just quickly share my screen. Okay, I think this should work now. So generative AI fundamentals, law and tech primer. Law, obviously, because I work in law, I'm kind of here as a double hatter today, not only representing the Institute for Global Negotiations, but also representing what I do for my day job, which is AI governance. So I do basically AI literacy workshops as a professional, but I wouldn't call it career. I'm hoping that at some point we will go from literacy to actually, doing something for the compliance of these things. But at the moment, it's mostly literacy. I've also written a book on the AI Act. If anyone has been following the regulatory scene in Europe, I run a podcast. I do a whole bunch of things, and they all have to do something with AI. So I'm super enthusiastic about the topic. And I hope that I can share some of the enthusiasm and also some of the knowledge here today with you in this brief intro into the law and tech of the generative AI. So to warm up, I will not make you do squats or jump or even leave your chair, but I will have you take your phones out and scan this QR code because I like to, well, it's a big webinar. There's a lot of us, but I still like to have a sense of who my audience is so that I can slightly adjust what I say and how I say it. So after another 10-ish seconds of me blabbering, I will switch to the next slide and we will begin to the poll because by that point, I will assume that everyone who wanted to scan the QR code has already done so. And over to the first question. I have previously used Copilot, ChatGPT, or similar AI tools. I'm guessing here it's going to be mostly yeses, but I have been surprised in the past. Okay. Oh, there are a few no's. That is interesting. So when I say I have used it, I mean literally in any sense of the word, to translate things, to write an email, to do a draft, to do whatever. And as I expected, most of you have used it in some shape or form. But now for the next question is, how often do you actually do that? Is it like your daily co-pilot that writes all the emails that you don't want to do or, makes them all pretty? Or is it only when you need something specific, like a draft for something, brainstorming, something like that? Or maybe it's even more seldom, never use it, or once a month, basically when I remember that it exists. Okay, I think now we are roughly at around the same number of answers as the previous one. So I use it personally every day. I use it to make my emails pretty. It doesn't sound nice, but sometimes it's necessary. I also use it to speed things up, but it is a dangerous tool, or, well, not a dangerous, but a tricky one to use. So hopefully after today, you will all be much better off knowing exactly what you are using and also how to use it best, especially in work-related tasks. But before that, I have two more questions for you. One, I can readily name other AI systems, tools, and applications. So not those that generate nice text and nice images, but I also can think of a few other ones that do completely different things. Okay, these are actually much better results than I had last time. I was having the same poll done at the university. And at the university, none of the students could think of any other AI tool. And I was like, this is Interesting. It was also a law university, so maybe that's why. But I thought that that was extremely interesting that I could not think of a single other thing that meant AI other than ChatGPT and Copilot. And now final one, AI system development and use should be regulated. By the way, there is a correct answer to this question. Interesting. We can have a discussion on that later. I will also leave you with a QR code to connect with me on LinkedIn or something, and then please explain why not, because I am of the firm opinion that it should be regulated, but it should be regulated in a smart way, not in a way that stifles everything, but in a way that makes us all more responsible, because like it or not, if we just give it to the people without any rules, it does not tend to end well, at least not in all cases. And that was the correct answer. Oh, and we even have a winner. I always forget that we have winners when I do these things. Nice. Anyways, there is more to AI than generative AI. Artificial intelligence can be used for a whole variety of things. Everything from condition-based maintenance, meaning predictive maintenance. So using past data on how systems have worked in the past to flag mistakes sooner. It can also be used to literally predict risks of car accidents based on traffic data, based on your driving data, based on your previous Google Maps data. It can also be used to predict your personality traits. They use both your facial expressions. They can use everything from your clicks, from your past recorded online behavior, and they can all use all that data to actually predict your origin, competence, intelligence level, how actually science-based that is beside the question, but this is patented technology. And this is also AI because it's big data analytics, right? No normal person can do that. Furthermore, they use your facial expressions and the way your face looks to predict your political orientation and target you with political advertising. That is also done by AI and algorithms. And of course, then at the end, at the very, very end, we have the whole generative AI hype. Why is it a hype now all of a sudden? Well, because now all of a sudden it's actually available to all of us normal humans, and we all can begin to do something with this, because previously, well, with condition-based maintenance, most of the people not experienced in technology, and even me, who has done programming courses and has actually programmed things in her life, could not do very much with condition-based maintenance. Even though from a technical side point, it is simpler, it just does not have a pretty user interface that, everyone can use. And for this particular reason, Gen AI has made a whole bunch of promises, not only for NGOs, but basically for companies anywhere. Everything from fraud detection and aid, now I adjusted it to NGOs, so we have fraud detection and aid distribution, automated grant application, impact measurement and reporting, sentiment analysis, chatbots for community support, and you can name a whole bunch of other applications. For some of these, generative AI is better suited. For some of these, it's worse suited. For instance, fraud detection, generative AI can't really help you much there, because that is basically big data science, and packing it into a nice user interface as in form of a chatbot can make it prettier, but it can also make it less accurate, because as some of you might know, Gen AI is not that good with numbers. Point being, there are a lot of tools being sold for all of these things, and I will not be giving you a 101 best prompts today, ever. That's just not what I do. I'm here to basically put things into perspective and kind of frame it legally, but also frame it in how we can do certain steps, or where to begin, which things to do first to ensure that AI in your NGO is used responsibly, regardless of what you are using it for. And now let's actually begin with the real content, right? Gen AI and the EU law. Why EU law? Well, that's because I come from the EU. I mostly deal with what I like to call a European minefield, with special emphasis on the two circled, so GDPR and the AI Act, but all of these apply in some shape or form to many of the things that we now call AI. It's a big field and it is a minefield. And there are regulations in other parts of the world as well. There's no doubt about that. But Europe has been leading by example basically the past few years. And after the AI Act, that is what we can expect also to continue. As for the AI Act, which is where I will be referring to some of the terminology today, it is already in force. It is not yet fully applicable. It is becoming fully applicable soon, especially for generative AI tools. That is happening later this year, to be more precise, in August this year. So if you're using Gen AI and you basically touch Europe in any shape or form, you should be aware of some of the things that the AI Act demands you to do. And you should be aware of these things whenever you are dealing with AI. And when I say AI, I mean it in the broadest possible sense of the word. Now, artificial intelligence means a lot of very different things to very different people, and even to similar people, it can mean very different things. That is why regulating artificial intelligence might have not been the best idea to begin with, because what we think about as artificial intelligence is usually this rather philosophical idea that, you know, computers can be intelligent. And then we have all these other buzzwords, which are not buzzwords, they are actually, you know, concepts in computer science that have been used for years, that have their meaning, and that were in the law at some part of the negotiation process, but then were kicked out later because probably they didn't sound as cool as AI and artificial intelligence, in any, like, regardless of that whole debate. I will run you through these things and concepts to kind of try to put things into perspective, right? So as I said, artificial intelligence, really broad. It can mean everything from an idea to a philosophy to a science to you name it. When I say AI or AI systems, I usually refer to them in the AI Act sense of the word. Why? Because that will be the most relevant sense of the word, at least, again, if your organization is in any way touching Europe. So under the AI Act, an AI system means a machine-based system that is designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy, may exhibit adaptiveness for implicit or implicit objectives, infers how to generate outputs that can influence physical or virtual environments. This definition, for better or for worse, is extremely broad. Let me explain why. So machine-based means anything that's written in code and then some things that aren't written in code as well. Varying levels of autonomy. First, autonomy was used as a misnomer for automation. There is an ISO standard that actually says that, funnily enough. And this is basically due to lawyers writing the law that don't always have the best technical understanding. But you know, trust me on this one, autonomy means automation, and varying levels of autonomy means everything from a 0 to 100. So as soon as you have your spam filter automatically, you know, sorting through your emails, that is degree 1 of automation. Congratulations. That may exhibit adaptiveness. That means it doesn't necessarily have to. For explicit or implicit objectives, well, people usually tend to design things with a certain objective in mind, so got that covered for most cases. Infer how to generate outputs. Well, if the output goes beyond 1 + 1 = 2, it also has to infer how to come to that output. Inference in this context is a computer science word, not a legal reasoning kind of word. So again, here we cross this bar very soon, and that can influence physical or virtual environments. Well, as soon as you implement it into any process, give it to a human, it will influence at least that process or that human. So again, here the bar is set really, really low. In my opinion, that was there by design, because we do have other types of definitions, such as, for instance, those in artificial intelligence or related standards from international organizations such as the ISO and the IEC, that say, well, that basically in a much simpler way say the same thing. So engineered systems that generate outputs for a given set of human-defined objectives. And here you can see also that they operate with varying levels of automation. And at some point in this particular standard, there's even a note that actually says that, well, lawyers kind of messed up and that there is no autonomy in that sense of the word. But that is beside the point now, and that is more of my rant than actually relevant information. Point being, you should think of AI systems very broadly. And when you're trying to organize how you use them internally, you should think of many of the things that you've been using for years as AI. It's not just Gen AI, it's much broader than that. So whenever you have to break your head over whether something is AI or not in the legal sense of the word, and whether you should, put some rules and governance procedures around it, it probably is, and you probably should. That is AI and AI systems. Now, AI systems can be developed in various ways using various different methods. One of them is machine learning. The essence of machine learning is that we now no longer only have if and then rules. So I have to hard code everything, if this, then do that. But I give a whole bunch of data to my code, to my system, algorithm, whatever you want to call it. And that system, algorithm, whatever you want to call it, learns something from that data. It can learn patterns, it can learn trends, it can learn correlations. The point is, it is way too difficult for humans to understand why exactly it recognizes certain trends, or it would take an average person a lot longer to come to the same conclusions. This is why machine learning as such has raised these issues of whether it has to be regulated, because we don't really see what is going on or why exactly some things were recognized in our data sets, which makes it, well, another buzzword, black box. So we can't really understand fully why certain things happen. But it gets a lot more complicated than that, right? So machine learning can operate using various different architectures of using computer science. And one of them is building on neural networks. Now, neural networks are a great and super interesting idea. They have been with us for a while, and they have basically emerged from the idea that, oh, humans are smart and we have these neurons, so let's try to replicate that. And the metaphor really works quite well. So you have an input signal, you process the input signal, and you have a certain output. Problem with artificial neurons, our brain neurons as well, is that a single neuron is not really smart. It can either tell you a yes or a no. It cannot tell you any probability. It can just be a 1 or a 0. That's why scientists at some point decided to connect multiple neurons into neural networks. And not only that, but also stack those networks on top of each other. And the more of these layers that we have, the more complex things we can solve. Why? Because we have more of these yes, no, 1, 0, 1, 0. And at the end, we have something which is a much smarter, more thought through result than what we had initially with just a single yes or a no. The problem is, again, as you can see on the slides, we have these hidden layers. What does hidden mean? Well, they're not hidden, they're there, we know it. We just can't really see the output of every single one of these nodes, which is what the dots are called. So we can't really say which neurons had the false result and which had the right result. So we can't really see what happened in between that led to a certain result. This makes tracing back errors very complicated. And again, even here, it gets even more complicated because not only do we have neural networks, but they are built in various different shapes or forms based on what we want to do with them. One of the recent and coolest architectures, at least for our today's webinar, has been the transformer architecture. Why? Because that is actually the architecture that is the baseline of generative AI. Now, transformers were introduced way back when in 2017 as a translation tool. This is something that needs to be kept in mind when using them for things that are not translation, because this also helps you understand why they make certain mistakes, because they were never built for these other things. And they just kind of then, at some point, we started giving them these things for them to do. But again, not there by design. Why were they meant for translations? Because they feature an innovative structure or an innovative architecture with two specific mechanisms. One is attention and the other is self-attention. Now, attention is pretty straightforward. You can think of it as translating word for word, right? From one language to the next. Problem is, then you have something in the end which is not a really good translation because, well, languages just don't work that way. They're different grammar rules, there are different sentence structures, etc. And what self-attention does is it weighs words in the single sentence of the input and of the output and puts it into context, let's say, for the model. So the model now understands this is a verb, this is a subject, this is their relation. And then when translating to another language, it can use these things that it found out by weighing things against each other. So the verb, subject, etc., and use them for its output. That has made translations a lot better. Why? I always take German as an example. In German, the verb always comes at the end of the sentence. If I'm translating word for word from English to German, I will have nonsense. But if my model knows that it speaks German and that the verb goes at the end, we will have all of a sudden a really good result. This is what these models were built for. Well, that didn't really work. Fast forward, now almost 8 years, and we are using them to write our emails, to give us ideas for titles, to give us all sorts of things, which is very cool, but it has its downsides. I will not be speaking about downsides today, but I will instead try to, put this into a legal perspective again. So the AI Act also tackles these models, and it calls them general purpose AI models or general purpose AI systems, rather than generative AI. So this is basically, generative AI is part of the general purpose AI models and systems, but essentially the idea is that also other things can have this general purpose. What is the difference between a model and a system? Great question. It took me a while to figure it out with these particular two definitions in the text of the law. But the idea is essentially that a model is not yet a commercial ready-to-use product. So you have a model that's trained with a large amount of data, and that displays significant generality and can be integrated into downstream systems or applications, but can't be used as is. Whereas a system can readily be used as is. So it has a nice graphic user interface, and I can type things and things come out. Nice. No computer science degree necessary to use it. So you can think of it as a model that is one day dreaming of becoming a system. That's the idea that we are dealing with here. If you are more tech savvy, a model would look something like the upper picture. So code, not much to do with it if you don't have, well, at least some computer science knowledge. And then on the lower side, you see that same model in a system integration. So the upper is the DALL-E code and the lower is the DALL-E integration into ChatGPT. Why is that important? Because, for instance, here, the law puts most of the obligations on the providers of the models, meaning OpenAI that designed DALL-E, Microsoft that designed Copilot. But it also doesn't leave the system providers, so the ones using and fine-tuning the actual ChatGPTs, DALL-Es, etc., in the lower shape and form. So it doesn't exempt them completely from obligations. And well, for that reason, I also brought a little red light, green light list for you all to keep in mind when actually using these things, especially for your work. First of all, log the system, fight for the essentials. You need to have some sort of form, summary, inventory, IT, infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, where you actually have all these systems written down, have their providers written down, have as much documentation as you possibly can on all these systems. That will usually not be a lot, but do store everything that you have just in case that things go south, to have something and to know where to start. Train the team. Make sure the people that use the system actually know how to use it. I have not talked about any of the risks here today. There are a lot of risks. The systems hallucinate, mean invent information. These invented information can potentially have consequences if, for instance, I've worked with banks previously, and then you have a chatbot promising non-existing interest rates. That can be a problem with actual financial consequences. So train the team that uses it to make sure that everyone monitors it and uses it properly and according to the rules that you've set. Don't brand what you're not willing to take responsibility for. I didn't have time to go much into this one, but the point is the AI Act kind of puts most of your responsibility on the brand that is on top of the model, or well, if you have a chatbot integrated on your website, it puts most of the responsibility actually on the provider of that website, not on the original provider of the developed model. That means that branding should be done carefully and only with appropriate contractual safeguards against the actual people who actually developed it. Any follow-up questions, please feel free to shoot them at me. I'm fully aware that I'm running through things right now. Control, access, monitor, use. Give your employees or your volunteers actually email addresses that they use to use these things for business purposes, and then also monitor if they use them according to your policies and rules. Limit data access when fine-tuning. Don't just give all the data to the model. Kind of have an idea of what is going on there, set access controls, and make sure to, put the switch on, don't use my data for further training of the model. That is something that can be done in, for instance, ChatGPT Enterprise version, and that is something that you should probably do if using these things professionally. Clearly mark all AI-generated outputs, all of them. If not substantially rewritten and controlled by humans, all of them. If it's an email written by AI, you need to disclose that, unless you've actually went through the email and changed it substantively. And set a check update. There will be new rules coming. There will be new rules coming in Europe, but also outside of Europe. And you should probably schedule a review to ensure that the system stays on track and that you are not putting yourself into any legal trouble. And that's it. Again, fully aware that I ran through things, so please do scan this second QR code, connect, and shoot any follow-up questions that you might have and that we don't get to tackle at the Q&A here today.
Thanks so much, Dea. We'll now move into the panel discussion, but two quick things to the audience before. I've noticed some people putting questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So I encourage everybody to ask questions so that we have more to talk about during the audience Q&A. So please get a head start on that. And secondly, we have a poll to circulate to collect some demographic data about our participants so that we can show the diversity of our participants to Microsoft, who is Microsoft Philanthropies, who are our donor. So please do pay attention to that poll and complete it over the course of the panel discussion. But let's dive in. Brent and Ed are also going to join us during the panel discussion, and I'm going to give them a bit of time to introduce themselves. So let's start with you, Brent, and then we'll move over to Ed.
Hey, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. And Taya, you're amazing, like as a podcast host as well. It's so great to have somebody who's really expansive and really bright and knowledgeable. And I'm really happy that you were able to, like, with your whole slides are great. And so I run Humanitarian AI meetup groups in 15 cities, and I run our Humanitarian AI Today podcast. And we started the podcast because it makes it so much easier to introduce amazing people to our members around the world and organize, discussions with a broader range of people. So we've been doing the podcast for maybe 5-6 years, and it's been growing really, really well. And I think it's become the leading podcast series covering our little niche humanitarian AI field. So we're really proud of that. But the podcast, it got its start in San Francisco, where I'm originally from. And yeah, a lot of tech people, they use meetup.com to organize events and discussions. And I think most people are familiar with it, but it's really popular with tech people and open source initiatives. So I used to go to a lot of these events, and I previously worked at the UN, and I've done a ton of humanitarian work in the field. And I would give lightning talks on how people could volunteer, how tech people could volunteer with the UN and help them out and help them code. And there was so much interest that we ended up just starting our own meetup groups just to channel people with expertise in AI into helping humanitarian organizations. And I think we've kind of tracked the whole, how do you say, the progression of AI in the humanitarian and nonprofit sector, and just, people's attitudes on the subject and how those attitudes and fears and optimism has changed over 5-6 years. So it's been an amazing journey. So it's cool to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the podcast and what we're hearing.
All right, thanks so much, Brent. Ed, over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your work?
Hi, Sandra, thanks. And also, yeah, just to compliment Taya on the presentation, that was great. Thanks so much for having me here today. I am Ed, and I help nonprofits and charities make sense of artificial intelligence. Over the past couple of years, so everything exploded right after ChatGPT came on the scene. I think I've worked with about 20 nonprofits, either building out AI infrastructure or helping them navigate all of the changes that artificial intelligence introduces. So that's through workshops, training, guidelines that the teams can use. I have spent most of my career working inside and alongside charities and NGOs to kind of understand how some of our worlds work and how difficult finding consensus can sometimes be around guidelines and things. But I also spent some time in the private sector working with Google, leading a design team at Dyson, and I founded an AI startup. So it sort of gives me a helpful breadth and depth when it comes to conversations around AI and supporting nonprofits on their AI journey. Anyway, I am super excited to be part of the conversation here today, and yeah, really, really interested to hear the questions everyone has for all of us.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Ed. Well, let's dive into it. So first, thank you so much, Taya. I'm also going to praise you on the presentation. I think it was a really useful perspective. But my first question, honestly, is for you, Brent. Like in all of these conversations, so you've got all these meetup groups in different places, different professionals. You've got the Humanitarian AI podcast. You know, I work in the humanitarian sector, and I've heard people be more negative than positive about AI, like voicing a lot of concerns. There's a lot of fear. There's a very large, I don't know if it's distorted risk perception of AI, but then there are also massive opportunities. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the guests on your podcast have said with regards to like these concerns and risks versus the opportunities?
You know, I think in the beginning of this, boom in AI, the interested in AI, it's kind of a futuristic thing, almost like flying cars. We're all thinking about far away, this applications of flying cars or something like that. And it was kind of a safe space, and that people felt comfortable being optimistic about AI and wanting to talk about it and envision ideas and things like that. But as we progress to today, more and more people are getting more insecure about AI because we're seeing it around us on a day-to-day basis now, and a lot of people feel behind implementing AI or behind experimenting with it. And, heads of organizations are wondering what they should be spending money on and what's practical and what isn't practical. So we're kind of at a phase right now where there's, the technology is moving exceptionally fast. And a lot of that movement and advancement, the average person doesn't see behind the scenes. So we have this advancement going on. And then you have groups, just nonprofits, wondering how to spend their budgets next year and what they should allocate funding for. And then we have, a giant aid funding crisis right now. And, a lot of those budgets are contracting. So I see a lot of optimism and a lot of insecurity, and we've kind of tracked it as people. It's like a exam, people are stressed and worried about it right now, but they're kind of excited at the same time. So that's what we're kind of seeing. A lot of apprehension and a lot of optimism, but it's quite interesting. It's evolving.
Yeah, it's evolving really quickly everywhere. But going to that point about like feeling left behind and not knowing how to engage, that's a really good segue into a question I have for you, Ed, which is, you've literally written a playbook for nonprofits on AI. I wanted to call that out. It's going to be on our resources page in case the audience is curious. But like, do you need a deep understanding of AI to get started? Like, do you need to know exactly what your use case is going to be as like a nonprofit or nonprofit worker that's new to this? Or like, where do we start?
Yeah, I think we start by getting started. I think one of the challenges I had, and it speaks to Brent's fear around how quickly everything is changing. Everyone already feels behind. I mean, I've been working with AI and machine learning since 2015, 2016, every day pretty much, and I feel behind, right? I feel behind all the time because it is just moving so fast and there's always a new model. There is no way to get ahead of it, and there's also no way to know how it might be useful or helpful for you until you start interacting with it. I have been very surprised about some of the things that it's been able to help me or clients with in a way I just wouldn't have been able to predict had we not started thinking about the problems they were looking at, the ecosystems they were working with, how to engage ethically and responsibly with data, with the problems they were trying to solve, and then figuring it out from there. The one that stands out for me is in the UK there's RNIB who have a helpline team, and it was really surprising how much we could support that team with giving them better access to information by having it, very simple, very straightforward, but just a chat interface between them and their intranet, essentially. But it really accelerated their progress, and they wouldn't have gotten to that without being willing to experiment and starting. So I think really it's about getting started and seeing where it takes you.
Yeah, totally. Keeping an open mind. And on that point about sort of like this speed, this accelerating pace of technological development, we see it playing out in AI especially. But I mean, I, for one, know that a lot of the big bureaucracies in the humanitarian space are state bureaucracies, sort of like these institutional systems, don't really move that fast. So, Taya, I'm really curious to know, like, what does generative AI even look like in the legal space? And like, how are these typically slow processes being challenged by this pace of development and the use of AI generally?
Very big, very difficult question. God, where do I begin?
Give us an example if you like.
Well, like as part of my work with or within the law office, we usually don't get a lot of very big public organizations or bureaucracies. We usually tend to work with some, public service type of offering things like schools and government, and that's it basically. And usually the most worrisome development that I see is basically just like putting it under the carpet. Like if I don't explicitly say that they can use it, but I also don't explicitly say that they can't use it, then everything will be fine. It won't. That's like that is the worst case scenario. Why? Because then you have the people who don't really know what they should be using it for using it, and you also don't really know what they are using it for. Very bad idea in general. Whether, having some sort of guidelines or saying, oh, these are the green lighted tools would much improve the situation, I'm not sure, but at least it would put you in control of the situation. So that would be probably like the biggest challenge that is kind of easy to tackle. Stop being in the denial phase. People are using it. A lot of people are using it, and at least have an idea of what they're using it for and kind of influence what they're using it for. When it comes to some really novel and revolutionary uses, we are not that far yet because people are still trying to, make the claim that they're not using it at all. Or in comparison to the companies, which are moving very fast and breaking a lot of things in the process, which are all now AI driven and AI powered and AI whatever. So kind of, I see a huge discrepancy there between the public sector that probably needs it more and the companies that are just busy trying to integrate AI into every step of the process. So I would say at least begin and get out of the denial phase.
Hey, I just wanted to add on that. And Taya, that's so good. And, for example, in the humanitarian field, a lot of institutions are experimenting with AI and sort of mandating, how people can use it or not use it. But in the field, you have people that are taking their mobile phone and they're pointing it at a column of refugees and they're asking ChatGPT to estimate how many refugees are in that column to help to plan, an aid deployment up the road. And so it's just kind of cool. And I think it, thanks to people feeling comfortable about experimenting with it, across an organization. It's really cool to see. And it's great to give ourselves permission to play with it. But I love your presentation, and we also need to be mindful about regulations and safety and, all these considerations. So, I think it's great what you were saying.
I think picking up on that, I've had a few conversations with teams who think that just saying no to AI is going to solve the AI problem as well. They're like, okay, we've written a policy document saying no one can use AI. It's fine. It's gone away. And then you speak to the actual team members and they're like, well, I mean, I'm just using it on my phone because I need to. This is how I solve the problems that I'm going to solve, and all my mates are using it. And I think there's a real challenge for policy to be accepting and walk that tightrope.
Yeah. Well, I definitely have like a zillion more questions for you guys, but we also have questions from our audience coming in. So one of the questions that we have, and honestly, I think this is a question for you, Thea, more than anybody else, is really around, hold on, let me pull it up right here, around liability, right? So we have somebody, oh, I think you've answered it already. Actually, okay, I'm sticking with open questions. You guys are too quick for me. So this is, I guess it's going to be more a question for Brent and Ed, but we have a question from somebody who's a grant writer and I'm a grant writer and I'm really concerned that donors don't want to see AI generated content. So what type of advice do you have for people who are doing like donor relations, resource mobilization, especially in these trying times, for humanitarian organizations? AI can write proposals in a snap, but, what advice do you have for professionals that have to put this information together very quickly, want to use AI, but don't necessarily want to be rejected because they did?
Hey, Ed, I hope you don't mind if I go
Jump in.
first. But it's interesting. So we just published a podcast interview on the New Commons Challenge, which is a challenge partially funded by Microsoft and others, just looking for individuals with large data sets, and they'd like to work with them to look at how AI applications can traverse the data sets. But what they've done is they've actually, the first step of the application process just involves sending in a concept note, a very short concept note. And I think if you make people feel comfortable about sharing using their own voice, a one-page concept note on what they're looking to do, then you're not getting a 10-page AI generated, proposal that's kind of boring and hard to process through. So I think if you humanize the process, that helps a lot to kind of filter out some of the, not necessarily the AI usage, but just get real people coming through the door first, and then you engage with them and then learn more about their initiative. So it just involves more legwork on the part of the foundations to just kind of stage engagement. So that's my
Yeah.
advice.
And recognize that, for many of the smaller organizations out there, this is an enabling tool, right? If you're complying better with grant guidelines in your proposal submission because you're using AI and English is your seventh language, then maybe that's fine. As like we use autocorrect, right? So using AI more as a helper than a replacer definitely makes sense. Ed, did you have some additional points there?
I mean, people are already using it, right? Person being very authentic to themselves, worrying about donors rejecting it. Lots of folks are already using AI. In fact, the vast majority are already using AI. The process is to make it so that it still sounds like a human, right? You're not using it you don't press the button and then send off the first thing that it responds with, right? You have to work through it just in the way that you would be copy editing, with taking information from others within the team, all the rest of that. But I agree with Brent. It's going to be interesting seeing how donors change their processes in the coming months, years to handle this deluge of applications. I've been hearing some horror stories of how, funders would normally get 10 applications, they're now getting 100 applications, and they just don't have a process in place to handle that change in quantity.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
just to add, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, they don't have an outlet in order to share information on some of their applicants. Like it'd be kind of cool if some foundations would actually publish maybe a list of 100 of their I don't know, vetted applicants that they thought were interesting. And, instead of everybody just trying to win a grant, maybe they just want to win some exposure, win some visibility. And again, they might be more apt to be authentic and human about applying if they know maybe they're not going to win, but they have an opportunity to just authentically share what they're working on. So I think it's important for foundations to kind of not toss everything in the trash bin after, everybody that didn't get the grant, or to kind of hide all that information.
Exactly. Okay, well, here's another question. Of course, we can't answer all of these questions. But this is a question around like, how does this play out in the real world? So we have one of our attendees who's asking about what are the most promising AI applications currently enhancing field operations in humanitarian contexts? I know not all of us are working in humanitarian contexts, but I'd like to tweak that question to ask you guys, what are the most promising AI applications that you're seeing used, in the field or in practice, in your case, Taya, with some of your clients? Maybe Taya, we can start with you. What does the real world use case look like for AI in the legal space?
Well, unfortunately, the legal space is a bit tricky. Some of the things that I haven't touched upon in my presentation is the risk categories. So as soon as you do it for anything, for instance, in the judiciary, you're in the high risk category, and that's not a category that you want to be in, especially with generative AI applications, because compliance is very difficult. When it comes to law offices and compliance in general, for instance, one of the current trend is AI compliance done by Gen AI. This is something that I am personally highly skeptical of, unless it's going to help me do my documentation slightly faster. I'm not really sure that I want it. I'm not really sure that I want, ChatGPT going through all the documentation and the internal processes and deciding if that is compliant or not. In terms of really good use cases for the legal industry, not that many, other than maybe making workflows more efficient, building a cool database that answers your questions as opposed to just spits out a document and lets you do the rest. But more than that, at this point, difficult, especially with the already existing hurdles in terms of regulatory compliance and GDPR, etc.
Yeah, how about you, Ed? I know you work on creating some of these applications too, so yeah.
Yeah, so the example I was going to give has nothing to do with me, and also hopefully I'm not revealing anything by giving the general broad brushstrokes of it, but one of the really interesting use cases I've heard is analyzing video, audio, and photography from conflict zones, and just the scale that AI can be used to look at human rights abuses, at governments behaving in ways that they wouldn't want to be, or they should not be behaving, and the scale that one can go through with AI is really interesting. I think a very interesting use case for the coming years. One of the things that I'm really interested in is actually how to use AI to not necessarily deliver AI systems, but to deliver digital services. So potentially niche digital services that you wouldn't have previously been able to produce or would have been too expensive to produce. But now, because AI is really very good at creating code and very fast at it, you can create some really interesting, creative, useful, usable products, in minutes that would have previously taken days and onwards. I think there's a really interesting space there, and certainly a lot of the projects I've been working on the last year, 2 years have been in that sort of space. So not directly delivering AI to the end user, but using it as a facilitator in the way that we use electricity or forklift trucks to do things. I think that's an interesting space.
Nice. Brent, I'm sure you've heard about some cool stuff in the podcast.
Just lately, I was talking to somebody from Microsoft, the AI for Good Foundation, and they were talking about their new AI models for detecting building damage or for assessing building damage, for example, in crisis zones or not areas where there's natural disasters. And, as Ed was saying, this is highly sophisticated where you have imagery and data and how do you incorporate together to do a quick scan of a crisis area and quickly determine, the scope of the need and the damage and that kind of thing. So, a real shout out to the team at Microsoft for working on this. So I'm really excited about that. And then the other thing I'm excited about is, you have a lot of open data sharing frameworks across the humanitarian community and AI applications to traverse that data and to help kind of match different actors, funders and aid organizations on the field and local level actors. So I'm excited about the kind of open data, matchmaking going on.
Yeah, totally. All right, we've got just 4 minutes left. I'm gonna throw one more question at you guys. Project management. So we've got somebody here who's asking, to what extent is the use of AI relevant and practical in project management? So you guys have talked about, some identification, but like planning, forecasting, resource allocation, monitoring, performance monitoring. Have you guys seen the use of generative AI for those purposes, like sort of that project management cycle?
I would love to see how that's used in a law context because it's very specific and it is sort of project management intensive. But I see
Yeah.
a lot of applications in ML ops, like how do you train machine learning models? And that's like a whole workflow of a project management workflow, and there's specific tools to do that. So Tia,
Yeah.
over to you.
I mean, for instance, the compliance softwares claim to do exactly that, right? To do everything for you, monitoring and then reporting based on the things that they monitored for. So that is kind of project management right there. I personally love to use generative AI for strategy, for planning, for what do I need to do when, what did I forget, and things like that. But in terms of actual monitoring and reporting, I would still leave generative AI out of that. There are AI tools to do that. They're just not generative and don't have a pretty user face. They will analyze your data and give you the numbers that you need. But again, not in a chatbot form. So I think there are limits to what generative AI can do really good, and what it is not there yet with. And that should also be acknowledged and kind of like kept separate, I would say. So planning, strategizing, managing in the real sense of the word, yes. Monitoring and reporting, probably not there yet.
Yeah. Gotcha. How about you, Ed? Have you seen anything interesting in that regard?
Yeah, I think so I agree with the fact that generative AI isn't great at analysis. I think where it can work quite nicely, both Anthropic's Claude, OpenAI's ChatGPT have access to analysis tools. So they're on the fly writing Python code to do the analysis of CSV files, Excel files, whatever. And I think there's some interest. I have certainly seen a few smaller organizations and charities with potentially relatively simple data sets. We're talking about 1,000, 10,000 rows rather than 100,000 millions of rows of data can get a lot of utility out of those. And so I think maybe smaller individual teams, certainly thinking back to my time in-house, I would have found them useful when I was doing some monitoring and evaluation. So, but yeah, there's definitely risks with them. I mean, generative AI is terrible at doing maths. Don't ask it to solve a maths problem. Ask it to write the code that will go and solve the maths problem is the nuance for that one.
Yeah. Okay, well, we are almost at time. So I've started sharing my screen again just to remind everybody that we've got these free AI resources here. The AI Compass sort of analyzes where is your organization at in terms of readiness and knowledge. The AI Skills Navigator is super useful for figuring out how do I use AI in my job based on my skill set. And we also have a governance framework. Also, Ed's AI playbook for nonprofits is also up on the resources page. And of course, we have 5 more webinars. So we really hope that everybody's going to join us for the remaining webinars. For those who have questions that have not been answered and you absolutely need our panelists to answer those questions, you may stay behind. But officially, this is the close of this webinar. We're right at the top of the hour. So thank you everybody who's been attending. And to our panelists, if you guys don't mind going into sort of like a rapid fire to wrap up some of the remaining questions. I do think that some people are sticking around just to hear you answer them. And so look, our first question in the chat is one that actually I want the answer to too. So why does AI take so much time to generate images? It's like a super basic question, but why? Like Taya, Ed, you guys are like the folks with the technical background. Do you know?
I mean, it's partially computational resources that it actually needs, and partially there was this trend at some point. I mean, it takes it a long time even to write down a response, and it's not always technical. Sometimes they almost want you to feel like the computer is thinking and writing the response. That was actually programmed into there at some point. When it comes to pictures, I do think it's mostly computational resources and just the network being overly burdened with everyone trying to generate their images. And then if you don't have the enterprise version and you're not paying for it, well, then you have to wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, part of it uses a different architecture, or at least until very recently has been using a different architecture. So the diffusion model that underpins most of Stable Diffusion and all of those is slower than the transformer model in terms of thinking about the life in the universe. So that's a reason. But yes, I think certainly recently with GPT 4.0 or whatever it is that it is named, the resource constraint has been a big problem for them.
Yeah. I actually have an answer that's in a post-it on my desktop to the person who asked the question around, are there more effective AI tools for grant writing? I know this follows on a thread, but since we have a nonprofit audience, I'm going to answer that one right away. There is an AI tool called Grantable that you can use to write proposals. Grantable, like writing a grant, Grant, able, ABLE. So you guys can look that up online. At least we can get that question out of the way.
Hey, can I add something on that? Just to expand on that. So one of the open data sharing frameworks that I'm really passionate about is called IOTI, and it's organizations use XML code to describe what they're working on, to document what they're working on. So you convert your, descriptive information into XML code, and the AI applications can traverse this XML code, but maybe the grant proposal in the future will be in code or in just a text, a sort of raw text format. So as a grant writer, you need to think about where the trajectory is going, where advances in technology are headed, and how open data sharing frameworks are being used and how AI applications traverse these frameworks. Because you might want to learn how to put in the right information into these open data sharing frameworks and the right metadata so that AI applications can traverse it to sort of answer questions posed by grant foundations about grantees.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. I'm going to try and sort of like summarize. We had two questions, and then, I think we can probably sign off and go about our business. I'm sure people will stalk you guys on LinkedIn and ask you more questions. But we have two people, or two audience members that were asking questions around inequality. So, one is asking about gender inequality, another was asking about, sort of like equitable application of AI and making sure that it develops in a way that doesn't retain some of the biases, that are potentially racial bias, class bias. The AI is only as good as the data that's used to train it. So the question is, and I'd like to just hear all of your perspectives on this. What can we do to make sure that AI isn't reinforcing gender and social inequalities that already exist? How do we sort of like try and make sure that we're creating a better future that's also more equitable for ourselves with AI rather than entrenching some of the discriminations and biases that we currently see? What are your thoughts, Ed? I'll start with you.
I mean, one of them is regulation, right? I think there is a role that governments and I guess NGOs need to be playing in this to advocate for the fact that we need transparency about what data is being used within these models. When we look back at what was in GPT-3, we can see that there are not hugely reliable sources. If we look at lots of the data that is publicly accessible for machine learning and training, it's Reddit, 4chan, spaces that you don't exactly, doesn't fill you with confidence of what's going to be coming up. And I think it's a really important thing for us to be aware of in the social good space, that we can't just trust blindly what's coming out of these models. And I think there is Tia, you were sort of talking about this, we have to take responsibility for a lot of, for the outputs, and we have to be very cognizant if we are giving a direct interface between a person and a large language model. It's our responsibility to mediate that relationship and make sure that there isn't harmful content being produced or entrenching biases and everything else.
Yeah, Taya, that's over to you in terms of just regulation. How do can we regulate this to be equitable, or what are your thoughts?
Unfortunately, not really, because the problem is not that someone doesn't want to do it, right? The problem is that it's a really difficult problem, right? So, I mean, we had cases in the past. We had Amazon recently with their only hiring men, which they then openly disclosed because they also didn't want that result. But that was based on previous data, that was the accurate result, that gender was of relevance. And then when they noticed it, they went back and tried to, fix it because they don't want it either. Then on the other hand, you had Google recently with their generative AI mess, where Gemini was, producing all of a sudden diverse senators in the 1800s. So you have an Indian as a senator in the 1800s, you had a black Nazi, you had a Korean Nazi generated by the model. And that was because they tried to implement restrictions on the back end. So kind of like manually program in diversity. But you see that also that doesn't work because then you mess up with the accuracy. So the problem is, it's a really difficult problem. And the problem is that these stereotypes and these biases that do get reproduced are reproduced because they are there. So other than, as Ed said, taking responsibility and actually, being aware that this can happen, and that's why we don't blindly trust them, but also, they save us time, but at some point someone needs to take a look at what they did, is the only way to go until, well, the computer science people actually figure out how to fix that. Not that I think that it's a fixable problem, because as I said, the models work fine. They just replicate what was there because they learn from what is there, and apply it to the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know how to say that. So, Taya, I'm glad you went first ahead of me. But yeah, that's exactly, it's so true. And on the side, I do a podcast for a health and explainable AI research laboratory, and just thinking about explainability and training AI applications and generating synthetic data to use to train and test and validate the applications. And it's just a lot of work. But, it's a challenging problem. And so, we need to unlock more funding to research these sort of things from a technical perspective.
Totally agree. All right, well, let's wrap this all up. Thank you so much, guys, for staying after time, for sharing your work with our audience. I know we're going to see some of you guys as panelists again in subsequent webinars. So for anybody in the audience that feels like they're missing you, they can always come watch you again. But yeah, thanks a lot for helping us kick this off. And thanks to our audience for attending. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.